Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Inspector Gibson Glavin of the Alberta RCMP K Division. Thank you for attending late this afternoon for today's update on the status of the shooting of our two RCMP members at the City of St. Albert yesterday morning.
Good afternoon, and thank you all for coming. I would like to provide an update on the status of our two RCMP officers who were involved in the shooting incident which occurred early yesterday morning at a casino in St. Albert. Auxiliary Constable Derek Bond was working in a volunteer capacity alongside RCMP Constable David Wynn when both officers were shot at close range by a suspect they were attempting to arrest in connection with the theft of a vehicle. Auxiliary Constable Bond was shot first, and then the suspect shot Constable Wynn. I'm very relieved to report that Auxiliary Constable Bond was released from hospital last night after being treated for a gunshot wound to his right arm and torso. He remains under medical care. Although his treatment did not require hospital care at this point, his injuries are serious. I want to emphasize that this was not a case of an officer simply being grazed by a bullet. The bullet narrowly missed vital organs and could have inflicted much more serious injuries to Auxiliary Constable Bond. Our thoughts are with Derek and his family in what will likely be a long period of recovery from this shocking act of violence. I thank them and Auxiliary Constable Bond for their service and commitment to the RCMP and the community. It is with deep concern that I inform you that Constable David Matthew Wynn has yet to regain consciousness after being shot in the head at close range by the suspect. Dave remains in hospital in Edmonton with his family at his side. I had the opportunity to go to his bedside yesterday, and I used the short time I had with him to tell him how incredibly grateful Canadians are to him for his willingness to accept the dangers of the front line in service to his fellow citizens. As you can imagine, this is a very difficult time for both families. They have asked for privacy, and we thank you for continuing to respect this request in the challenging days ahead. They have asked me to convey their appreciation for the love and support they continue to receive. Yesterday was a very tough day for our officers and their loved ones. I want to thank those officers who worked together to track and locate the suspect. I particularly want to acknowledge the impact of this tense, dynamic, and dangerous situation on those at home who were worrying about them. Without your support, there would be no police officers out there. I can also tell you that the sadness felt by those who worked with Dave and Derek at St. Albert Detachment has been offset by the countless acts of kindness and support they have received in the aftermath of this tragic event. I would like to thank all Canadians for the overwhelming outcome of support the RCMP has received since the shooting yesterday morning. I particularly want to acknowledge the community and the good people of St. Albert. The feedback and support and gifts that have been dropped off. I was made aware of a very poignant gesture where St. Albert residents were asked to leave a porch light on last night in support of our members. I can tell you that was felt in the heart by all of our members, not just in St. Albert, but across the force. So, to the community of St. Albert, thank you so much for your support. I cannot tell you how much this support means to us and the broader law enforcement community who stand shoulder to shoulder with the RCMP during difficult times like these. I'll now turn it over to Commissioner Polson.
Well, good afternoon, everyone. Bon après-midi, tout le monde. I would just simply take a few moments and express to Marianne and the members, men and women of the RCMP and K Division, my intense sorrow and sadness about what has happened here in St. Albert. I've been briefed on the operations that took place in response to this stolen vehicle and how it was that our officer came to be shot and how it was our auxiliary officer came to be shot. And I must tell you that I'm very, very sad for how this has turned out. But in the response that was delivered by the members of the RCMP in apprehending this suspect, who I can tell you is sadly very, very well known to the police and represents a significant accumulation of criminality and behaviors that I think will require the RCMP and other stakeholders in the criminal justice system to examine very closely as to how it is that this person was walking amongst us. I think many of us would be surprised to have an individual facing the accusations that he was facing, having the criminal record that he did have, having the unresolved issues that he did have in the community. And as we've done in other instances where we've had to come to an understanding and provide an account to Canadians on our actions and our operations, we're prepared to do that, and there will be, and I've directed that we have an in-depth analysis of how it is that this individual came to be free. And I would invite those who have a role to play in exacting accountability for this kind of conduct to examine closely all of the stakeholders who have participated in the criminal justice path that this individual has taken, and we will share our information as we begin to understand how it is that he came to be free among us. So I would just again express my condolences to the families of our officers who have been hurt, and the officers who have responded, and thank Marianne and her team for the leadership that they have exhibited here in Alberta. Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, I'm not going to provide any kind of prepared speech or address with regard to the operations that have taken place, but I will take some questions.
Yes, if you could tell me a little bit about what you know about Mr. Rand. You say that he's got a criminal background. Can you elaborate on that, please?
I can tell you that he has an extensive criminal record, and he has outstanding charges before the courts in a number of different areas right now.
Can you expand on that, please?
Probably at this point in time, we want to restrict it to just the large numbers because they're quite comprehensive, and it would be quite a long list of things for me to try and go through.
I'd like to add a little bit to that if I could. I think, as Marlon has said, we need to have a full understanding of what is an incredibly complex criminal history that was very, very active right up until the moment that he shot our officers. So we need to have a firm understanding, but I can describe for you a veritable labyrinth of charges that he was facing, of recognizances that he was under, overlapping firearms prohibitions, and just a series of conditions that aren't making sense to me anyways as I review it, and I've been in policing for 30 years and I have not seen anything the likes of what I've seen here. Well, I'd like to think that any death is preventable, but we're going to have to understand that. We need to understand how it is that he came to be walking among us. And in that sense, if we could have maybe come to a fuller understanding as to the threat that he presents, and perhaps it could have been prevented.
Did those officers know who they were dealing with when they attempted to make that arrest?
Well, let's be clear. No, they did not. And in terms of what those officers were doing, they were doing what officers in my force and officers in every other police force do in this country 24 hours a day. They investigate suspicious occurrences. And in this case, it was an investigation of a stolen vehicle that our officers put together, and were actively investigating, walking into a public place like a casino where other people were around and simply advancing their investigation. They had no idea who this person was, none whatsoever. The vehicle was stolen from a jurisdiction nearby. It was not linked to this individual, and there was no way that we could expect that these officers would know the kind of threat that was walking around inside that casino.
Did the suspect have a history of violent crime charges or convictions?
Yes, he did. Yes, he did. And he had a history of firearms-related offenses. He had been prohibited from possessing firearms for his life. He was out on conditions that had him not possess ammunition or firearms, and some of these things are overlapping, as I say, and I describe it as a labyrinth because we need to unpack this. Even in the day that I've had to review this material, I cannot come to an understanding of the multitude of processes that were at play with this individual.
I was just wondering if this changes how your officers are going to be responding to what would seem to be everyday calls.
Well, I think I can fairly, and I don't want to speak for the commissioner, but I can fairly safely tell you that everyday occurrences like this happen across the country and certainly across Alberta. Not every individual that we deal with is going to be armed to the teeth and trying to kill our members. We recognize that, and we are still part of the community. The community still is enjoys the support for the RCMP. This doesn't change that in any way. Our officers always deal with situations in a very operationally ready state. That won't change in any way, shape, or form. We will, of course, always look to see whether we can learn, but in this particular case, I'm not going to say we're going to up the level of alertness or armament or anything when we're dealing with routine calls. That's just not going to happen.
And I think it needs to be said that this cannot be understood in how these officers responded. It should not be understood as a firepower issue. Our officers were well equipped. They were wearing their equipment. They had their equipment available. Officers that came to support them had the equipment available. This was a developing investigation of sadly, a routine stolen vehicle that happened in the blink of an eye inside a public place in this casino. I think we need to understand that. We need to think about that. We need to sort of analyze that. But frankly, this is not an issue of a tactical response gone bad. This is an issue of this individual walking around in conditions that we need to understand whether it was reasonable for this man to be walking around us.
Do we know if the suspect was under the influence of alcohol or drugs?
I don't know.
I can tell you right now that the autopsy on the suspect has not taken place yet. Those kind of examinations obviously will come from the autopsy.
Could you give me more information about the wounds of the officers in the hospital they did with?
I'm sorry?
What kinds of injuries?
To Constable Wynn? I can, if you'd like, ma'am, go ahead.
We can have it in French. Okay. But I will speak to it in English. He sustained a life-threatening injury to the head, close range. We do not expect him to survive. He's being treated and looked after in the hospital, but it is not optimistic that he will survive.
Is he on life support, and that is the only thing that's keeping him alive right now?
I'm not prepared to comment on the exact treatment that he's receiving, but his life is at risk.
When do you expect that we will know?
Moment to moment.
Moment to moment. We're praying for him. That's all we could do.
Yes.
Well, first-
How are you folks aware of how
Excuse me.
the gun into the casino?
I can tell you that the gun was on his person, and I can tell you from my understanding of it that there are no security provisions going into the like metal detectors or anything like that. It was secreted upon his person. It wasn't openly carried. It was a handgun. That's correct. Constable Wynn does have a wife and 3 children.
The guy has been a routine, obviously, someone that seems like this real asset to this community, working in schools, things like that.
Constable Wynn is an exceptionally fine officer. Much of the commentary that I've heard from the people that work with him and from the people that supervised him was that he's extremely diligent, hardworking, and a very effective police officer. And in fact, point of fact, that was borne out by the actions that evening, where he was pursuing a very routine matter and took it to levels that we would expect fine officers to take it to, in trying to pursue a criminal and bring to justice somebody who'd stolen an automobile. Oh yeah, the original answer, that was in relation to the health of the members, right?
Yes. Est-ce que vous pouvez répéter votre question, s'il vous plaît? Constable Dave Wynn est encore à l'hôpital et puis ses blessures sont tellement graves que nous croyons qu'il ne survivra pas à ses blessures.
Est-ce que vous pouvez plus élaborer sur quel genre de blessures c'est à la tête?
Il a été tiré à la tête, oui. Bien sûr. Merci.
Two more questions.
Thank you.
That's correct. There were two shots. One hit Auxiliary Constable Bond. The second hit Constable Wynn. I've actually viewed the video. They were both acting at the time and attempting to effect the arrest. It was a very, very short and sharp confrontation. We're talking 3 to 5 seconds.
Was this a physical confrontation that they were involved in? So they sort of just really got the hands on?
They were trying to actually place hands on the individual to talk to him and apprehend him, and he pulled away and 2 shots were fired. It was a very brief confrontation. That's correct.
And it was not the same vehicle that was found in the ditch?
That is correct. That is the same vehicle. That vehicle was being examined and had been taken to the custody of the RCMP in St. Albert Morinville Detachment.
Okay, thank you very much, everyone. That's what we have for you right now. We'll provide more information as it becomes available to us. Thank you.